Hello, my dearest friends, and a very warm, quiet welcome back to Hazy Histories. It's so good to have you here again, settling into our shared sanctuary. This is our gentle space, a quiet corner of the world where the sharp, jagged edges of the past are smoothed over by time, where forgotten stories are not dry lessons to be learned, but soft flowing lullabies crafted to guide you toward a deep and peaceful rest. Tonight, please allow me to take your hand and lead you on a very particular kind of journey. We will not be marching through the thunder of great battles, nor will we trace the rise and fall of sprawling, ambitious empires. Instead, our path will be a quiet one. We will follow the silent footsteps of a single small object as it moves through the centuries. An object of almost impossible beauty, which carries within its facets the immense sorrowful weight of history. A thing of both unparalleled splendor and, some would say, unending sadness. Before we begin, let it all go. Find that perfect position in your bed, the one where your body feels most at ease. Allow your head to feel heavy and supported on your pillow. Feel the gentle weight of your blankets, a soft, comforting pressure. Let's take a slow, quiet breath together. Breathe in deeply, filling your lungs with the calm of the night. And now breathe out a long, slow sigh, releasing all the thoughts, all the tension, all the little worries of the day. Just let them drift away from you, like clouds across a moonlit sky. You don't need to try to listen. You don't need to try to remember. There is nothing to be gained here but rest. Simply allow my voice and this story to become a gentle current, a soft flowing stream to carry you effortlessly toward the shores of sleep. And if you enjoy these dreamy journeys, we take together a quiet like or a soft-spoken word in the comments acts as a warm, gentle signal across the digital ether, letting me know that you are here with me, resting in this peaceful space. Our story tonight, you see, revolves around a diamond. But please let the image that forms in your mind be a gentle one. This is no ordinary diamond, not the kind that shouts its presence with a fiery, fractured brilliance. This is a stone that seems to do more than simply reflect the light that falls upon it. It feels, instead, as if it absorbs the light, drawing it deep into its core, and with that light, it seems to draw in the very stories, the quiet triumphs, the whispered secrets, and the profound fates of all those who have dared to call it their own. It has been known by many names across the long, slow march of time, each name a different chapter in its silent, storied life. Some first knew it as the Tavernier Blue, a name tied to its mysterious origins and its first long journey from the sun-drenched East to the candle-lit courts of Europe. Later, it was given a name of royal splendor, a title of immense pride, Le Bleu de France, the blue of France, a jewel deemed worthy of the grandest of kings. And finally, after centuries of wandering, it settled on the name that carries with it the softest, most beautiful, and perhaps most deeply ironic weight of all the Hope Diamond. Hope. A lovely word, isn't it? It feels like a gentle sunrise full of light and quiet promise. Yet the story of this stone is a vast and intricate tapestry, woven with threads of both breathtaking light and the deepest, most sorrowful shadows. So for just a moment, let us conjure its true image in the quiet, safe theater of your mind. Let go of the modern idea of a diamond, that brilliant, blinding, almost aggressive white sparkle. That is too sharp, too loud for our gentle story tonight. Instead, I want you to imagine a blue. A deep, velvety, almost bottomless blue that pulls you in. Picture the color of the deep ocean far, far below the surface, where the world is hushed and still just as the very last rays of a long sunset have faded from the world above. It is the profound, inky blue of a vast midnight sky, completely clear of clouds seen from a remote, lonely mountaintop, far from the distracting glow of any city. It's a color so deep, so pure, that it feels as if you could fall into it and drift forever in its silent, peaceful expanse. This is a blue that holds secrets, and when a single soft ray of light, perhaps from a flickering candle in a quiet room, touches its meticulously cut surface, the stone does not explode with brilliance. It doesn't shout its beauty, it whispers. The light seems to sink slowly into its mysterious depths, as if being welcomed home, awakening something ancient and dormant within. And from its very core, a mysterious, ghostly red fire seems to begin to glow. It is not a flame, but a slow, smoldering ember, a hint of crimson that flickers and shifts as the stone is gently turned. It is like a tiny burning heart, a spark of life and passion captured and held forever within a perfect silent shell of eternal blue ice. Those who have seen it in person say that its beauty is not something you merely admire from a distance. It is something that connects with you, something that haunts you in the most beautiful way. It is a beauty that stays with you, a quiet memory, long after you have looked away. And perhaps it is precisely because of this strange, captivating, almost unsettling beauty that a whisper began to follow the stone on its long and winding journey through history. It was a persistent, quiet rumor, a story passed down in hushed tones from one generation to the next, across oceans and through the fall of empires. It was a whisper of misfortune, a hushed and sorrowful tale of tragic endings and of lives that seemed to slowly, inexorably unravel in sorrow after coming into its possession. People began to call it a curse. It is a word heavy with dread, a word that speaks of dark magic and inescapable superstition. But tonight, we will not approach this story as a frightening tale meant to keep you awake. Not at all. That is not our way here. We will look at this supposed curse not as a sinister supernatural force, but as something quieter, something far more human. We will see the stone as a silent, patient diary, its endless pages filled not with ink, but with the poignant, often tragic stories of the people who possessed it. It is a flawless, silent record of human ambition, of soaring love, of devastating loss, and of the profound, simple truth that even the greatest beauty in the world cannot protect one from the fundamental sorrows of life. The stone itself is blameless, of course. It is just a stone. It simply watched. It simply was. So, let us gently, carefully turn to the very first page of this silent blue diary. Let us allow our minds to drift backwards, backwards, through the soft, swirling mists of time to the opulent, gilded, candlelit world of 17th century France. We travel to a place and a time of absolute power and unparalleled splendor, to the magnificent court of the Sun King himself, where the light of 1,000 flickering candles would first fall upon this dark blue heart, and its recorded, verifiable history would finally and fatefully begin. Let your mind drift, now carried on that soft breeze of time, back to the year 1668. And I want you to imagine, just for a moment, that you are there. You are not a king, nor a queen, nor a courtier. You are simply a silent observer, a weightless presence in a quiet private room within the grand, sprawling palace of Versailles. This is not the famous Hall of Mirrors crowded and echoing with the laughter and gossip of the French court. This is a smaller, more intimate space, a personal study, where the king conducts his most important affairs. The air here is warm and thick heavy, with the sweet, honeyed scent of hundreds of beeswax candles. Their flames dance and flicker, casting long, soft shadows that play upon the gilded walls and the intricate tapestries. Mingled with the wax is the clean, calming scent of lavender and dried herbs, a subtle perfume that clings to the heavy velvet curtains. From where you are, you can hear the gentle, rhythmic crackling of a fire. It's a comforting sound emanating from a grand fireplace carved from a single massive piece of cool white marble. The logs shift and settle, sending up a soft cascade of golden sparks. Every now and then, you hear the faint, luxurious rustle of heavy silk and brocade as the few people in the room shift their weight or turn their heads. It's a sound of immense wealth, a soft friction that speaks of layers upon layers of expensive fabric. Through the tall, arched windows, you can see nothing but the deep, impenetrable black of the night. The formal gardens of Versailles, so full of life and color during the day, are now a sleep shrouded in a profound royal silence. The only world that exists is this warm, candle-lit room. Before you sits the most powerful man in the world, King Louis XIV of France, the Sun King. His face, illuminated by the soft candlelight, is regal and composed a mask of divine authority. He is the center of this universe, the sun around which all of France, and indeed much of Europe, revolves. And standing opposite him is a man who could not be more different. His name is Jean-Baptiste Tavernier. He is not a courtier. He does not possess the polished elegance or the powdered wigs of the men who surround the king. Tavernier is a merchant, a gem hunter, a world traveler. His skin is weathered and browned by the harsh sun of the East. His clothes are practical, made for long journeys, not for palace life. There is a weariness in his posture, the fatigue of a man who has crossed oceans and deserts. But his eyes are sharp and bright, gleaming with the shrewd intelligence of a survivor, a man who has seen things the coddled aristocrats in this room could never even imagine. The room is hushed. The king makes a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and Tavernier steps forward. With hands that are steady and deliberate, he places a small worn box on the polished table between them. It is covered in dark velvet, its edges frayed from its long and arduous journey. He opens the lid. For a moment, there is no sound at all. Not even the crackle of the fire seems to dare to break the spell. The king leans forward, his eyes fixed on the contents of the box. And then you see it. Resting on a bed of faded silk is the stone that would come to be known as the Tavernier Blue. But it is not what you expect. It does not glitter. It does not flash. It seems in the warm candlelight to be a void. It is a pool of the deepest, darkest blue imaginable, a shape crudely cut, almost like a fragment of the night sky itself. It drinks the light of the candles, swallowing their flames into its shadowy depths. There is a raw, untamed power to it. It is not a jewel. It is a presence, a deep blue hole in the fabric of the opulent room, lying innocently in the palm of a weary traveler. King Louis, the man who possesses everything, the man for whom gold is as common as dust, is utterly speechless. He who is never surprised is captivated. He is mesmerized by this small, dark object. He slowly extends a hand, his fingers clad in a pristine white glove. He reaches out not with the haste of a buyer, but with the reverence of a worshiper. His fingertip gently, tentatively touches the cool, smooth surface of the stone. In this silent, sacred moment, you realize this is not a commercial transaction. There is no haggling, no discussion of price. This is an act of acquisition of destiny. It is a conquest. The Sun King has just found a piece of the midnight sky, and he is determined to make it his own, to command it, just as he commands all else. The stone has found its first royal master. King Louis was a man of absolute vision. The raw, untamed beauty of the Tavernier blue, while captivating, was not enough for him. It was a marvel of nature, but he was the Sun King. His world was one of order, of symmetry, of perfection, crafted by the hand of man to reflect the glory of God, and by extension, the glory of the King himself. This rough, dark stone needed to be transformed. It needed to be civilized. It needed to be reborn in his image. And so, he summoned to his court the finest jewel cutter in his kingdom, a man named Sieur Pitot. This was a man whose entire life had been dedicated to understanding the secret heart of gemstones, to unlocking the light that slept within them. The king's command was simple, yet monumental. Take this dark blue mystery and make it perfect. Make it worthy of France. Make it worthy of him. Now, I want you to shift your perspective. Leave the opulent halls of Versailles behind. Let us travel to a smaller, quieter place, a workshop. Imagine a room not grand, but meticulously organized. The air is still and focused. Sunlight streams in through a large paned window, illuminating millions of tiny dancing particles of dust in its golden beams. But this is not ordinary dust. It is the dust of precious gems, the spectral remnants of rubies, emeralds, and diamonds. The room smells of metal, of oil, and of the cool, clean scent of stone. This is Sieur Pitot's world, a world of intense concentration, of quiet patience. Before him, on a velvet cloth, lies the Tavernier blue. For weeks, for months, he does not even touch it with a tool. He simply looks. He studies it from every angle, holding it up to the light of the sun, to the light of a single candle. He draws endless sketches on soft parchment, mapping its internal landscape, searching for its soul. This is not merely a craft. It is a conversation with the stone. He must understand its flaws, its strengths, its hidden planes of cleavage before he can dare to make the first cut. And then the work begins. A process that would take 2 full years, 2 years of holding his breath. Imagine the tension in that quiet room. The soft, steady scrape of the grinding wheel, the gentle tap of a hammer on a chisel. Each movement is a prayer. Each decision is a monumental gamble. One miscalculation, one slip of the hand, one moment of lost focus, and this priceless treasure, this jewel of the Sun King, could shatter into 1,000 worthless fragments. The weight of the entire kingdom's prestige seems to rest on the steady hands of this one man in this one quiet room. And then after 2 years of this silent, painstaking devotion, the work is done. The stone is reborn. It has been diminished in size from a rough 115 carats to a breathtakingly perfect 67.5 carats. But what it has lost in weight, it has gained immeasurably in spirit. It is no longer the Tavernier blue. It has a new, glorious name, Le Bleu de France, the blue of France. And now it sparkles. Oh, how it sparkles. With 72 masterfully cut, perfectly symmetrical facets, it finally performs the magic it was born to do. It captures every single ray of light that touches it, pulls it into its deep blue heart, and explodes it back out into a dazzling, hypnotic dance of color. It flashes with the deepest royal blue, the softest sky blue, and in its depths, that mysterious red fire now burns with a clear and vivid intensity. It is a living thing, a masterpiece of human artistry and natural wonder united in perfect harmony. The transformed diamond is set in a simple, elegant gold clasp. It is not a ring, not a necklace, but a magnificent centerpiece designed to be worn by the king on the most solemn and important of state occasions, suspended from a long, rich ribbon of silk around his neck. Now, just for a moment in the quiet of your own space, imagine that feeling. Imagine the cool, heavy weight of it resting against your chest, the gentle touch of the silk ribbon on the back of your neck. You are standing in a grand hall in Versailles, and the light of 1,000 candles is falling upon you. But the eyes of the court, the eyes of every duke, every ambassador, every lady are not on your face. They are fixed upon the dazzling blue star that rises and falls with every breath you take. It is a symbol that needs no words. It is power made visible. It is wealth beyond comprehension. It is the very heart of the French monarchy resting for this moment with you. The life of King Louis XIV, much like the magnificent, multifaceted diamond he now so proudly possessed, had two distinct and opposing faces. There was the face the world was meant to see, the face that was carefully crafted and presented with theatrical perfection, the radiant, powerful, indomitable Sun King. He was the living embodiment of France's golden age, a monarch whose splendor, whose very existence, was considered a divine performance, unmatched anywhere in the civilized world. This was the face of absolute victory, of glorious creation, of a man who seemed to command the sun itself to rise and set upon his kingdom, bathing it in his personal golden light. But there was another side to his long and storied life, a side that was kept in the shadows, a private world marked by profound personal sorrow, by quiet, relentless loss. And as the decades of his reign wore on one after another, these shadows began to grow longer, deeper, stretching their cool fingers even into the most brightly lit corners of his court. It was during these later, more somber years that the first whispers began to circulate. Not in the grand public halls, of course, but in the quiet, drafty corridors of Versailles, in the servants' quarters away from the king's ever-watchful ear. The courtiers, the maids, the ladies-in-waiting, they began to wonder in hushed tones. They would look at the dazzling blue diamond, the bleu de France, as it rested on the king's chest during a formal ceremony, and then they would look at the ever-growing list of tragedies befalling the royal family. And in those quiet moments they started to ask a fearful, almost blasphemous question. Could it be possible? Could this beautiful, perfect blue stone, this treasured heart of France, actually be a bringer of sorrow? Could it be the silent, celestial source of the dark, heavy clouds that were slowly, inexorably gathering to obscure the sun? The story of this supposed curse does not begin with the thunder of grand political failures or the humiliation of lost battles. Its roots are far more intimate, more personal, and for that reason, far more chilling. The story is one of quiet, creeping human heartbreak, the kind of deep internal grief that no amount of gold, no army, no measure of absolute power can ever hope to prevent. I want you to imagine Louis, no longer the virile, commanding monarch in the prime of his life, but an old man. An old man surrounded by unimaginable wealth, living in the grandest, most magnificent palace in the world, a palace that now to him must have felt cavernous cold and profoundly empty. He had become a man, haunted by the ghosts of nearly everyone he had ever loved. He was a king, cursed not by a lack of power, but by an excess of time fated to outlive his own happiness. Imagine the quiet, echoing grief that must have filled those gilded halls. His son, his only legitimate son, and his beloved heir, Louis, who was known as Le Grand Dauphin, was suddenly struck down by smallpox. The future of France, the next link in the chain, was gone. The court observed its formal period of mourning. The king grieved as a father, and the line of succession passed to his eldest grandson. But the shadows were not finished with the House of Bourbon. Just a year later, that grandson, the Duke of Burgundy, a promising and widely beloved young man, also fell gravely ill and died. The court was plunged into a deeper state of shock and sorrow. And then, in a cruel twist of fate, his wife, the Duchess, followed him to the grave within a week. And as if that were not enough of a blow from heaven, their eldest son, now the new heir to the throne, also succumbed to the same mysterious illness. One after another, the strong, vibrant pillars of his dynasty crumbled into dust. The line of succession, once a mighty flowing river, had dwindled to a fragile trickling stream, resting entirely on the frail life of a single sickly great-grandson. The great palace of Versailles, once a glittering stage for the most brilliant celebrations in Europe, was now a house of perpetual solemn mourning. The joyful sound of music and laughter was replaced by the somber rustle of black mourning clothes and the hushed whispers of a court steeped in fear and grief. And there is another earlier story, a strange and cautionary tale perhaps, the story of a man named Nicolas Fouquet. He was the king's immensely powerful superintendent of finances, a man of boundless ambition and even greater wealth. Fouquet built himself a chateau so magnificent, so breathtakingly beautiful, that it dared to rival the king's own palaces. To celebrate its completion, he threw a party of such legendary extravagance that all of France was left in awe. And King Louis, upon witnessing it, was left consumed by a cold, burning jealousy. Now here is the whispered part of the story, the part that has clung to the diamond's legend for centuries. The legend says that Fouquet, in his moment of ultimate hubris, managed to borrow the great uncut blue diamond from the merchant Tavernier even before the king had finalized its historic purchase. He is said to have worn it proudly at his lavish party, a dark blue star of supreme arrogance shining on his chest, a jewel he had no right to wear. Whether this is a historical fact or a later embellishment, we cannot say for certain. But what we do know is what happened immediately after. Shortly after that fateful party, Fouquet was arrested on the king's direct orders. He was charged with treason and embezzlement, and after a famously biased trial, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. He would spend the rest of his days locked away in the remote grim fortress of Pignerol, dying in obscurity. Was this simply the swift and terrible punishment of a jealous king? A powerful monarch ruthlessly reminding an overreaching subordinate of his absolute power? Or was it something more? Was it the first quiet warning sign? The first subtle act of a curse that attached itself not just to the diamond's rightful owners, but even to those who merely borrowed its cold blue light for a single fateful night? History does not give us a clear answer. There are only the whispers, the intriguing, fearful stories told in the dark, shadowy hallways of the past. And then, in the late summer of the year 1715, after a reign of 72 years and 110 days, the longest and most glorious reign of any monarch in the grand sweep of European history, the sun finally irrevocably set. King Louis XIV, the sun, king the center of the universe, passed away. The most brilliant, most extravagant, most influential and imitated era in the history of France came not to a dramatic sudden end, but to a quiet, somber, and exhausted close. His death was not the peaceful drifting off to sleep, that one might wish for a king who had lived so long. He died of gangrene, a painful and deeply humbling affliction that slowly, mercilessly consumed his leg. It was a bitter and inglorious end for a man who had spent a lifetime cultivating an image of divine perfection and invincibility, a man who had presented himself to the world as a living God. He who had been the radiant, unblinking center of the universe faded slowly into darkness, leaving behind a kingdom that was at once the cultural capital of the world and a nation on the brink of financial ruin. He left a legacy of both breathtaking cultural brilliance and immense unspoken human suffering. And the blue diamond, his great and personal treasure, the stone he had personally commissioned and transformed from a dark, rough-hewn mystery into a dazzling symbol of his own radiant glory, was now without its master. Following the king's elaborate and solemn state funeral, Le Bleu de France was carefully, reverently placed back into the heavily guarded royal treasury, the Garde Meuble de la Couronne. It was laid to rest once more on a bed of soft dark velvet inside a locked casket, which was in turn placed inside a locked chest within a guarded room deep in the heart of Paris. It returned to the cool, quiet darkness, its fiery blue heart once again dormant, its purpose seemingly fulfilled. Its brief, spectacular time in the sun was over, and now it simply waited, silent, patient, waiting for the next chapter of history to unfold, waiting for the next royal hand to reach for it, waiting for the next human story of ambition and sorrow to absorb into its timeless crystalline memory. It is a strange and profoundly humbling thought, isn't it? A king, a man so powerful, so absolute in his authority, that he famously, and perhaps apocryphally, declared, "L'État, c'est moi." I am the state, was in the final analysis just a man. He was mortal. His body, which had been adorned with the finest silks and most precious jewels the world had to offer, was ultimately subject to the same laws of decay and death as the body of the humblest peasant in his kingdom. His immense power, his unimaginable wealth, his victorious armies, his gilded palaces, and his peerless collection of glittering stones, none of it could hold back the slow, inexorable, and utterly indifferent tide of time. None of it could bargain with fate for even one more day, one more hour of life. The king was gone. His story was finished, his long chapter closed, and committed to the dusty pages of history. But the diamond remained. It was utterly unchanged. It was completely unfazed. It was still perfect, and for all intents and purposes, eternal. Its deep, hypnotic blue color did not fade. Its mysterious internal fire did not die or diminish. It simply endured a silent, beautiful, and impartial witness to the fleeting, fragile, and often tragic nature of human life and power. Its first and greatest master had returned to dust his magnificent reign, now just a memory, while the stone itself seemed poised to live forever. It serves as a quiet, gentle reminder that the magnificent things we think we own in this life in the end often own a small piece of us, carrying our stories forward in their silent hearts long after we are gone. But the story of this stone was in truth only just beginning. Its time with the great Sun King was merely the first chapter in a much longer, much more dramatic, and far more turbulent tale. From the deep quiet and peaceful darkness of the royal vault, it would soon be brought out into the light once more. It would be worn by a new king and by a beautiful, ill-fated queen, whose name would become forever synonymous with both glamour and tragedy. It was destined to be the centerpiece of a new court, one that tried desperately to replicate the splendor of the Sun King's era, but tragically lacked its substance and its unshakable authority. It was a court that was quite literally dancing on the edge of a volcano. So let us pause here just for a moment in this quiet, reflective space between chapters. Let us allow the story of the great king and his blue diamond to settle in our minds like soft dust motes in a silent, sunlit room. Let us take a slow, deep breath together and feel the calm of this moment in time, this gentle interlude, because the next chapter of our story will carry us forward into the whirlwind of the 18th century, into the powdered wigs and rustling silks, and into the very heart of a gathering storm. A storm that would sweep away 1,000 years of tradition. A storm that would end a monarchy and change the world forever. A storm called the French Revolution. Let us allow time to drift forward once more, like a gentle gilded boat on a slow-moving river. The decades have passed since the somber death of the great Sun King. The world has changed in subtle ways, but the court of France, a universe unto itself, still clings desperately to its intricate rituals, its powdered elegance, its unshakable belief in its own divine permanence. It is a beautiful, fragile bubble, floating serenely, unaware of the changing winds. Now seated upon the throne of France is the great-great-great-grandson of Louis XIV. His name is Louis XVI. By all accounts, he is a good man, a fundamentally kind man, but perhaps not a man forged by nature to be a king, especially not in such a turbulent and uncertain time. He is quiet and often indecisive, a bit shy, a man who finds more genuine pleasure and purpose in the intricate mechanical work of locksmithing in the satisfying solid click of a well-made lock, tumbling into place, than he does in the complex shifting and often treacherous affairs of state. He is at his core a gentle soul placed by birth into a role that increasingly demands a spine of unbending steel. And by his side, the radiant, celebrated center of courtly life is his queen, Marie Antoinette, a Habsburg princess from Austria. She arrived in France as a young, wide-eyed girl, beautiful, vibrant, and perhaps a little naive to the labyrinthine politics and unspoken rules of her new home. She possesses a certain undeniable charm, a deep and abiding love for fashion, for extravagant parties, for creating a perfect, idyllic, beautiful world for herself and her intimate circle of friends, a world tucked away within the secluded, manicured grounds of Versailles. She is in many ways the last glittering living symbol of the Ancien Regime, the old regime, a world of unparalleled privilege, breathtaking luxury, and a delicate powdered, almost dreamlike beauty. And so, Le Bleu de France, the great blue diamond of France, is once again brought out from the cool, silent darkness of the royal treasury. Its role has shifted slightly. It is no longer just a ceremonial stone worn on a ribbon for the most solemn of occasions. It is now a celebrated part of the French crown jewels reset and worn by the new king, and often, with his permission, lent to the queen to adorn her gowns. It has become a favorite piece in the royal collection, a celestial star among a galaxy of other magnificent stars. I want you to imagine Marie Antoinette now in her element, in a scene she herself has carefully crafted. Picture a warm, balmy summer evening at the Petit Trianon, her private fairy tale palace and garden nestled deep within the vast grounds of Versailles. This is her personal sanctuary, a world away from the stiff, suffocating formality of the main court. It is an intimate party, a gathering of her closest confidants. The soft evening air is heavy with the sweet, intoxicating scent of night-blooming jasmine and roses from her gardens. The gentle sound of music from a small ensemble and the soft, melodious laughter of her friends drift through the trees. And there she is, the queen, a vision of pastoral elegance, her hair piled high and powdered a soft, snowy white, her gown a masterpiece of pastel silk and delicate lace. And resting against the warm skin of her décolletage is the blue diamond. In the soft, flattering, almost magical light of 1,000 candles and colorful paper lanterns that she has had hung from the branches of the ancient trees, the stone is truly alive. It seems to breathe. It catches the gentle, flickering light from every conceivable angle, throwing off soft, hypnotic sparks of deep, velvety blue and flashes of its secret inner red fire. It creates a shimmering ethereal halo around her, a personal aurora. For the queen and her circle of friends, it is simply a magnificent jewel, the most beautiful of all their many beautiful things. It is a symbol of her elevated status, a testament to her impeccable taste, a perfect dazzling accessory for a perfect enchanting evening. She is almost certainly unaware of its deeper, more somber history, of the quiet whispers of a family curse that once circulated through these very same gardens. The sorrows of the long-dead Sun King are a distant, dusty historical footnote, a story from another age. For her, in this moment of blissful perfection, the stone holds no darkness, only light. It is a plaything, a beautiful bauble, a thing of immense beauty, and nothing more. But here, in this perfect, glittering, self-contained moment, lies a quiet, devastating, tragic disconnect. While the queen and her courtiers are dancing in their perfumed private palaces, lost in a waking dream of silk and champagne and idle gossip, a very different and brutal reality is unfolding just a few miles away, beyond the gilded gates and high walls of Versailles. In the crowded, narrow, unsanitary streets of Paris, there is no music, no laughter. There is the gnawing, persistent, painful ache of hunger. There is the bitter cold of endemic poverty. There is the rising murmur of discontent. The soft, elegant rustle of a silk gown in the palace stands in stark, cruel, and deafening contrast to the angry, desperate, and very real rumbling of empty stomachs on the city streets. And the blue diamond, with its cool, aloof, and otherworldly beauty, unwittingly becomes a powerful symbol of this fatal disconnect. To the starving commoner who hears the exaggerated, whispered tales of the queen's extravagance, the diamond is not a thing of beauty. It is a symbol of unimaginable waste of a monarchy so insulated by its own immense wealth that it has become deaf to the suffering of its people. The stone that was once the celebrated heart of France's glory is slowly, silently becoming a symbol of its deepest, most dangerous, and ultimately fatal division. The final brilliant, beautiful gleam of the old world is casting a very long, very dark shadow. And no one in that candlelit garden, least of all the queen, has any idea that the very ground beneath their dancing feet is about to tremble and then give way entirely. The year is now 1789. The storm that was once a distant, almost romantic rumble on the horizon has now arrived. It has broken over Paris with all the terrifying, indiscriminate fury of a hurricane, and it is washing everything away. The French Revolution erupts not as a single event, but as a cascade of moments, each one more shocking and world-altering than the last. The delicate, glittering bubble of Versailles, a world built on centuries of tradition and privilege, is shattered forever. The era of powdered wigs and polite minuets, of courtly intrigue and pastoral fantasies, is swept away by a tidal wave of raw, primal human emotion, anger, hunger, and a desperate, unquenchable cry for liberty. The years that follow are a dizzying, terrifying whirlwind of chaos, fear, radical hope, and radical violence. The very foundations of society are cracking. Let us allow our focus to drift forward through this tumultuous, bloody period to a specific critical week in September of the year 1792. Paris is in a state of near anarchy. The monarchy has been officially overthrown, but the new revolutionary government is fragile, unstable, and deeply paranoid. The city is gripped by a fever of suspicion. Rumors fly like sparks in a dry forest, igniting fires of violence in the streets. In this precarious power vacuum, in this week of profound and violent uncertainty, the great institutions that once seemed as eternal and unbreachable as the heavens are now vulnerable, their sanctity violated their treasures, ripe for the taking. And one of these institutions is the Garde Meuble de la Couronne, the Grand Royal Treasury building on the Place de la Concorde that for centuries has housed the priceless legendary jewels of the French crown. For generations, it stood as a silent, glittering symbol of the monarchy's unbreachable power and its bottomless wealth. Now it is just another building in a city that is burning both literally and metaphorically. Under the deep cover of darkness, over a period of 5 long and chaotic nights, a brazen and opportunistic group of thieves takes full advantage of the city's turmoil. With the city guard in disarray, they break into the treasury. I want you to dispel any image of a silent, sophisticated modern heist. This is not that. This is a smash and grab, a desperate, brutal, chaotic plundering, driven by greed and opportunity. Let yourself imagine the sounds of that night. The sharp splintering crack of a heavy ornate door being forced from its hinges with iron crowbars. The jarring metallic screech of ancient complex locks being pried open by brute force. The tinkling, cascading, and ultimately shattering sound of heavy glass display cases being smashed with hammers and the butts of muskets. The air inside those once hallowed halls is thick with plaster dust, the sweat of exertion, and the metallic scent of fear and adrenaline. Imagine the thieves, their faces masked by shadows and grime their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and avarice scrambling through the opulent moonlit rooms. They are grabbing handfuls of history, stuffing their pockets with pearls that once graced the throat of Catherine de' Medici, with rubies that once adorned the fingers of Cardinal Mazarin, with emeralds that had witnessed centuries of royal secrets. And somewhere in this frenzied, frantic looting in the deep darkness of that September night, a hand reaches into a broken cabinet and finds it. Le Bleu de France, the great blue diamond, the stone that had been a sun king's pride, a young queen's delight. The very symbol of an entire regime is now just another piece of loot in the dark. It is unceremoniously plucked from its soft velvet cushion, perhaps dropped onto the cold, dusty stone floor, then hastily shoved into a rough burlap sack or a dirty coat pocket, jumbled together with other lesser stolen gems. The diamond that had been guarded so meticulously, that had been handled only with pristine gloved hands and the utmost reverence, is now a fugitive. In the days that follow, it is passed from one shadowy figure to another in the back alleys and dingy taverns of a revolutionary city. Its monetary value is immense, but its historical identity is now a profound liability. It is too famous, too unique, too recognizable. It cannot be sold openly. Its royal pedigree, once its greatest asset, has become its own kind of curse. And so, it vanishes. It disappears completely from the historical record as if it had never existed. The great blue heart of France swallowed whole by the chaos of the revolution, gone without a single trace, and the fate of its final royal owners mirrors the fate of their lost precious jewel. Their world, too, has been utterly shattered. King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette are arrested, their lives turned upside down in an instant. They are stripped of their titles, of their palaces, of their fine clothes, of their servants, of their very identities. They are no longer a king and a queen. They are now addressed as Citizen Louis Capet and the Widow Capet. They are prisoners of the very revolution they failed to prevent, or perhaps never even truly understood. The sprawling, magnificent palaces, where they once ruled with absolute authority, are now their prisons. The thousands of luxurious custom-made gowns are replaced by simple, worn-out, threadbare prisoners' garments. The delicate scent of orange blossom perfume is replaced by the damp, musty, suffocating smell of a prison cell. Their lives, once a constant, dazzling public spectacle of glamour and power, are now a constant, humiliating public spectacle of downfall and despair. Just like their famous blue diamond, they have been torn from their gilded, protected setting, their future now completely terrifyingly unknown. The world they knew, the only world they had ever known, has vanished, and they, along with their most precious jewel, are now well and truly lost in the storm. We will not dwell on the gruesome physical details of what comes next. Our journey tonight is one of gentle rest, not of jarring horror. The blade of the guillotine, the roar of the crowd. We will leave those to the history books. Instead, I want you to feel the atmosphere, the heavy, cold, emotional weight of these final moments. Let us imagine a bleak and chilling morning in January of 1793. The sky over Paris is a uniform, unforgiving sheet of gray. A damp, bone-chilling mist hangs in the air, clinging to the bare branches of the trees. The city is unnaturally quiet, holding its collective breath. King Louis XVI, now simply Louis Capet, is brought in a carriage through the silent streets to the public square that was once named for his great ancestor Louis XV, but has now been grimly renamed the Place de la Révolution. There, the newly invented instrument of execution, the guillotine, waits its tall frame, a dark silhouette against the pale gray sky. We do not need to see the event itself. Instead, let us focus on the man. By all accounts, he faced his end with a quiet dignity and a surprising strength that he had rarely shown as king. He stood before the massive crowd, his voice clear, and he spoke his final words, forgiving those who had condemned him to death. He tried to say more, but the loud rolling beat of a drum was ordered to drown out his voice. And then there was silence. The man who had been born to be the absolute monarch of France was gone. The year wears on a year of terror and blood. And then in October, on another cold and gray morning, it is the Queen's turn. Marie Antoinette. She is no longer the radiant youthful figure from the Petit Trianon. She is a woman broken by grief and imprisonment. Her once beautiful hair is said to have turned completely white from the stress and sorrow. She is dressed in a simple white shift, her hands bound behind her back. But as she is led to the cart that will take her on her final journey, she holds her head high. She stumbles, at one point accidentally stepping on her executioner's foot, and her final recorded words are not a plea or a curse, but a simple, polite, "Pardon me, monsieur. I did not do it on purpose." It is a small final echo of the courtly grace that had once defined her entire world. She too is brought to the square, and she too meets her end with a quiet, stoic dignity, a final act of defiance against the cruel fate that had befallen her. And in the aftermath of these monumental, world-shaking events, the whispers start again. The hushed, fearful whispers about the great blue diamond. People began to connect the dots. Could this be the terrible ultimate climax of the curse? The last two royal owners of the stone had both suffered the most public, most humiliating, most tragic end imaginable. Their deaths were not just deaths, they were spectacles of national catharsis. The story of the curse, once just a piece of court gossip, now seemed terribly, chillingly real. And the story grew, fed by the chaos and paranoia of the times. People added new victims to the list. They whispered of the Princess de Lamballe, a dear and loyal friend to the Queen. It was rumored that Marie Antoinette had once let her borrow the blue diamond. The princess, too, had met a horrific end, murdered by a revolutionary mob in a particularly brutal fashion. It seemed that anyone who had even touched the stone was now marked for death. The diamond itself had vanished, but its dark, invisible shadow seemed to still hang heavy over the fate of all who had been in its orbit. It was as if its malevolent spirit lingered long after the stone itself was gone. But where was the diamond during all of this? Where was the physical object at the heart of these dark legends? The honest answer is that no one knows. It simply disappeared into the vast churning underworld of revolutionary Europe. Perhaps it was immediately taken across the channel to London. Perhaps it was hidden in a cellar in Paris, waiting for the turmoil to subside. Perhaps, as many feared, it was crudely broken apart, its great historical identity destroyed forever, so its smaller anonymous pieces could be sold more easily. History, even well-documented history, has its silences. It has its blank pages, its missing chapters, where the trail of evidence runs cold. And for 20 long silent years, the fate of the great blue diamond of France was one of history's most profound and tantalizing silences. It was gone, a ghost, a legend, a whispered curse with no heart. 20 years, 2 long decades, a generation. That is how long the great blue diamond of France remained a ghost. It lived on only in memory and legend, and in the dark whispers of its supposed curse. The world moved on. Napoleon rose and fell. Empires were forged and broken. The violent chaos of the revolution gave way to a new, uncertain order, and the stone was presumed lost forever, a priceless casualty of a turbulent age. And then in the year 1812, something remarkable happened. In London, the bustling, fog-shrouded capital of a new global empire, a magnificent blue diamond quietly, mysteriously surfaces for sale. It is not the same stone that was stolen from the Garde Meuble. Not exactly. This new stone is smaller, weighing approximately 45.5 carats, a significant reduction from the 67.5 carats of Le Bleu de France. Its shape is different too. It has been recut into a more fashionable cushion shape. It has been deliberately altered, its appearance changed. But some things cannot be hidden. Some signatures of nature are impossible to erase. The color is unmistakable. It is that same deep, hypnotic, velvety blue, the color of a midnight ocean. And when the light strikes it, just so there, it is the faint, ghostly, smoldering red fire glowing from within its depths. There could be no doubt in the minds of the few gem experts who were privileged enough to examine it. This was not a new discovery. This was a resurrection. This was the very heart of the long-lost blue diamond, of France expertly recut and reshaped its identity, cleverly disguised in a deliberate attempt to wash away the blood and chaos of its revolutionary past. The ghost had returned, wearing a new face. The stone is documented as being in the possession of a London diamond merchant named Daniel Eliasson. The exact details of how he acquired it are conveniently lost to history. He likely knew its true provenance, but like any good merchant kept that dangerous information to himself. For the first time since it had been violently torn from the French treasury, the diamond was once again an object of commerce, a commodity to be bought and sold, its royal and bloody history now just a part of its sales pitch, a tantalizing whisper of scandal to increase its allure. The stone passes through the quiet professional hands of the London gem trade for some years, a magnificent but dangerous treasure. And then sometime around the year 1839, it finds a new, more permanent home. It is purchased by a man who would unknowingly give the diamond its final enduring and most famous name. His name was Henry Philip Hope. Henry Philip Hope was not a king or a prince. He was a man of a different kind of royalty, the royalty of new money and immense banking wealth. He was an immensely wealthy London banker, a prominent member of the Anglo-Dutch Hohenzollern dynasty. But more than a banker, he was a passionate, almost obsessive collector of fine art, and most especially of rare and magnificent gemstones. He was a true connoisseur. For a man like Hope, acquiring this spectacular, mysterious blue diamond was the crowning achievement of a lifetime of collecting. It was the ultimate prize. And so, the diamond, once the Tavernier, blue, once Le Bleu de France, now entered the possession of the Hope family. And in the official catalogue of his unparalleled collection, it was listed for the first time under its new name, the Hope Diamond. It is a beautiful name, isn't it, Hope? A word that speaks of optimism, of a bright future of salvation. It feels like a deliberate attempt to cleanse the stone of its dark and tragic past, to give it a fresh start, a new identity. But one has to wonder, could a simple name change really erase the whispers of a centuries-old curse? Would this stone, now named for Hope, finally bring good fortune and happiness to the family that possessed it? Or would it simply continue its silent, patient work, writing new sad chapters in its long and storied diary, this time under a beautiful and terribly ironic new title? We will soon find out as the damp gray fog of 19th century London begins to clear, and we get a closer look at the lives of the Hope family, the new master of the Blue Diamond. Henry Philip Hope was a man entirely different from its previous royal owners. He was not a king, not a duke, not a politician. He held no aspirations for military glory or territorial expansion. Henry Philip Hope was a gentleman. A very, very wealthy gentleman, to be sure, but a quiet one. He was a lifelong bachelor, a man who seemed to find his truest companionship not with people, but with objects of rare and profound beauty. His one all-consuming passion was collecting. He dedicated his life and a considerable portion of his vast fortune to assembling one of the most magnificent private collections of gems and jewelry the world had ever seen. For a man like Henry Philip Hope, the acquisition of the great blue diamond was not a display of power or a symbol of his social standing. He had no need for such things. For him, this was something far more personal, far more profound. It was the pursuit of perfection. It was the ultimate prize in a lifelong quest for the sublime. To him, the Hope Diamond was not a tool of statecraft or a bauble for a queen. It was the pinnacle of natural art, a masterpiece sculpted not by man, but by the immense, slow, silent forces of the earth itself. It was nature's Sistine Chapel, and he was its devoted, humble curator. And so the diamond began a new, much quieter phase of its life. Let us imagine its new home. Picture a grand, stately townhouse in the heart of London, its rooms filled with books, art, and cabinets of curiosities. Within this house is a special room, a private gallery. The walls are lined with dark, rich wood, and the heavy velvet curtains are drawn, keeping the harsh light of the outside world at bay. The only light comes from carefully placed lamps that cast a soft, warm glow. And in the center of this room, resting on a stand of custom-made dark velvet inside a heavy bell-shaped glass dome, sits the Hope Diamond. It is not being worn. It is not locked away in a vault. It is displayed. It is presented with the reverence one would afford a master sculpture or a sacred relic. It is here, in this quiet scholarly sanctuary, that Henry Philip Hope would spend his hours simply looking, studying, and admiring. Distinguished guests, scientists, artists, fellow collectors would be invited into this inner sanctum. They would enter the room and a hush would fall over them. They would stand in silent contemplation before the deep blue of the stone, speaking in low, respectful tones. They were not just looking at a jewel. They were communing with a piece of history, a miracle of nature. In the devoted hands of Henry Philip Hope, the diamond, after its violent and chaotic journey, seems to have finally found a measure of peace. It was no longer a symbol of anything. It was simply itself appreciated for its pure, silent, and mysterious beauty. And here is a curious thing. During the entire time that Henry Philip Hope owned the diamond from its acquisition until his death, the so-called curse seemed to have fallen dormant. His life was not marked by scandal, by tragedy, or by financial ruin. He lived a long, peaceful, and intellectually fulfilling life, surrounded by the beautiful things he loved. He passed away quietly in 1839, a respected and admired figure. It was as if the stone finally appreciated for its own sake, rather than for the status it conferred, had ceased its malevolent work. The whispers of the curse grew faint. The ghosts of the French court seemed to recede into the mists of history. It was a period of calm, a long, quiet interlude in the diamond's dramatic story. The storm had passed, and the waters were still. Or were they? Was the curse truly broken? Or was it merely sleeping? Was it biding its time, waiting patiently for the quiet collector to pass from the scene, waiting for the stone to once again fall into the hands of those who might be more vulnerable to its strange and shadowy influence? The peaceful chapter of Henry Philip Hope was closing, but the book of the Hope family was just beginning. The peaceful, scholarly custodianship of Henry Philip Hope was, as it tragically turns out, just a calm eye in the center of a very long and gathering storm. The moment he passed from this world, the profound tranquility that had surrounded the great blue diamond shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces, and the dark, troublesome whispers began anew. The trouble started, as it so often does in families of immense wealth, with a will. Henry Philip Hope had died a lifelong bachelor with no direct children to inherit his vast and legendary collection of treasures. His last will and testament was a complex, and in some key areas, a somewhat ambiguous document. It named his eldest nephew, a man named Henry Thomas Hope, as the primary heir to his sprawling estate, which included, most notably, the priceless and unparalleled collection of gems. And it is here, in the dry, legalistic, and emotionless language of a last will and testament, that the curse, or perhaps something far more mundane and recognizably human, reawakened with a vengeance. The problems that arose over the next decade were not the grand Gothic tragedies of beheaded queens or mysterious wasting illnesses. They were the quiet, bitter, and deeply corrosive tragedies of the everyday world. Tragedies rooted in the most common of human frailties: greed, entitlement, jealousy, and intractable family pride. The stone, it seemed, did not need to conjure ghosts or shadows to cause misery. It simply had to exist, a glittering, silent catalyst for the very worst of human nature to reveal itself. The primary conflict came from another branch of the already complex family tree. The wife of one of the other nephews, a formidable and determined woman named Louisa Beresford, was utterly convinced that her husband, and by direct extension, she had been unfairly and maliciously cut out of the most valuable portion of the inheritance. She firmly believed that the magnificent gem collection, including its crown jewel, the Hope Diamond, should have been designated as a separate entity and divided equally among all the nephews. She felt slighted, cheated, and deeply insulted by the will's terms, and Louisa Beresford was not a woman to accept such a perceived insult quietly or gracefully. And so began a bitter, protracted, and incredibly public legal battle that would consume the family for the better part of a decade. The Hope family, a dynasty once synonymous with immense wealth, international banking power, and quiet, unshakable respectability, began to systematically tear itself apart in the dusty courtrooms and the sensationalist newspapers of Victorian London. Try to imagine the slow grinding and soul-crushing misery of it all. Imagine the endless tense meetings with teams of bewigged lawyers, their dark wood-paneled offices smelling of old paper, leather-bound books, and dust. Picture the angry accusatory letters written with scratchy, sputtering pens, their pages filled with venomous words, and veiled threats flying back and forth between once beloved cousins, aunts, and uncles. Think of the public testimonies where the most private and embarrassing family matters, arguments over money, whispers of incompetence. Accusations of greed were laid bare for all the world to see, to dissect, and to judge. The family Hope, once a united and powerful European clan, was now hopelessly fractured, its relationships poisoned by suspicion and resentment, its great and noble name dragged ignominiously through the mud of public opinion. And at the very silent, impassive center of this ugly, protracted dispute was the beautiful blue stone, the Hope Diamond, a perfect inanimate object that was now sowing nothing but discord, anger, and profound unhappiness, its very name becoming a bitter mocking irony with each passing day of the trial. The immense fortune of the family, once thought to be inexhaustible, began to drain away, siphoned off by the crushing, ever-mounting weight of exorbitant legal fees. But the significant financial cost was nothing compared to the deep and lasting emotional toll. This was a quiet, brutal war, fought not on a foreign battlefield, but across polished mahogany dinner tables and in the cold, unforgiving corridors of the court. And it was precisely during this very public and very messy family feud that the modern legend of the Diamond's Curse was truly born and cemented in the public imagination. The newspapers of the day, always hungry for a sensational story, especially one involving the dramatic downfall of the rich and powerful, seized upon the Hope family's escalating troubles with glee. Clever journalists and imaginative storytellers began to weave a grand, compelling, and highly entertaining narrative. They meticulously dug up the old tragic stories of the French royal family stories that had been half forgotten. They recounted in lurid detail the mysterious disappearance of the diamond during the bloody chaos of the Revolution. And then, in a stroke of narrative genius, they connected that dark, violent, and romantic past directly to the current unhappy and rather sordid spectacle of the warring Hope family. They created a seamless, irresistible, and easily digestible story. This was, without a doubt, a cursed stone. It was a jewel that brought ruin and sorrow to all who possessed it, whether they were absolute kings in a gilded palace or powerful bankers in a foggy London townhouse. This is a quiet but profoundly important point in our story. The idea of the curse, as we know it today, was not some ancient mystical legend passed down from the jewel's supposed time in India. It was largely a 19th century media creation, a fantastic story skillfully crafted to sell newspapers and to entertain a public that was endlessly fascinated by tales of haunted objects and the dramatic misfortunes of the wealthy. The curse was not a historical fact. It was a story, but it was a very, very good story. And it stuck. From this point forward, the diamond would never again be seen as just a beautiful rare stone. It would forever be the cursed stone, its dark reputation for misfortune now as integral to its complex identity as its deep blue color and its fiery red heart. The old whispers of the French court had now become a deafening public roar. After the long and bitter legal battles finally subsided, the great blue diamond, along with the rest of the family fortune, eventually passed down the line of inheritance. Its new owner was Lord Francis Hope, the great-grandson of Henry Thomas Hope, and the man who would prove to be the final and most infamous Hope to possess the stone. Francis was a man born into immense privilege, but he seemed to lack the discipline and business acumen of his forefathers. He was a quintessential aristocratic playboy of the late Victorian and Edwardian eras. His passions were not for collecting art or managing banks, but for the faster, more thrilling pursuits of high-stakes gambling horse racing and a life of relentless, dazzling extravagance. He lived a life far beyond even his considerable means, a life built on credit and the reputation of his family name. In 1894, Lord Francis entered into a marriage that was considered scandalous by the rigid standards of the British aristocracy. He married a beautiful, vivacious, and incredibly popular American music hall actress named May Yo-Hae. She was a star of the stage, charismatic and beloved by the public, a stark contrast to the stuffy, reserved world of the British nobility. Together, they were a glamorous, high-profile couple, their lives chronicled in the gossip columns of London and New York. And May Yo-Hae loved the Hope Diamond. She wore it often, both in public and for stunning publicity photographs. The image of the beautiful American actress draped in furs and wearing the legendary blue diamond became iconic. For a brief shining moment, it seemed that Lord Francis and his bride were living a fairy tale life, a whirlwind of champagne theater premieres and lavish parties, with the great diamond as the sparkling centerpiece of their happiness. But the fairy tale had a dark underside. The foundation of their glittering world was built on sand. Lord Francis's spending was reckless, and his luck at the gambling tables was consistently disastrously bad. He burned through his inheritance at an astonishing rate, pouring money into losing bets, ill-advised business ventures, and the bottomless pit of maintaining their opulent lifestyle. The debts began to mount first as a trickle, then as a flood. Creditors began to circle. The once mighty Hope fortune, which had survived decades of legal battles, was now being bled dry by one man's inability to control his impulses. The inevitable finally happened. Lord Francis Hope, heir to one of the great banking families of Europe, was forced to declare bankruptcy. The glittering facade crumbled, revealing the rotten structure beneath. The money was gone. And with the money, the glamour and the fairy tale marriage also vanished. May Yo-Hae, who had perhaps been more in love with the lifestyle than with the man, left him. Their marriage, once the talk of the town, ended in a bitter and messy divorce. And now Lord Francis, disgraced and desperate, was forced to do the one thing his family had fought for a decade in court to prevent. In order to satisfy his legions of creditors, he had to petition the court for permission to sell the family's most prized and inalienable heirlooms. And the crown jewel of that collection, the one piece that could clear his debts, was the Hope Diamond. The stone that had been a symbol of the Hope family's wealth and prestige for over 60 years was now being sold off to pay for the follies of its last heir. It was a quiet, humiliating end to the family's long and storied custodianship. And this is where the legend of the curse received another powerful injection of fuel. In the years that followed her divorce, May, Yohei, now no longer a lady, but an actress in need of publicity, began to tell her story. And she told it with great dramatic flair. She gave interviews and even co-wrote a series of sensational articles blaming every misfortune in her life, the failure of her marriage, the loss of their fortune, her subsequent career troubles squarely on the malevolent influence of the Hope Diamond. She claimed it was a stone of pure evil, a bringer of ruin that had destroyed her life. How much of her story was true emotional conviction, and how much was a clever bit of self-promotion to sell newspapers is impossible to say. But it didn't matter. Her dramatic first-hand accounts of living with the cursed stone were exactly what the public wanted to hear. Her stories were reprinted around the world, cementing the Hope Diamond's reputation as a beautiful but deadly object, a talisman of tragedy. The whispers of the 19th century had now, at the dawn of the 20th, become an established, undeniable fact in the public mind. Once it was finally pried from the desperate hands of Lord Francis Hope in 1901, the diamond became something of a wanderer. It was no longer an ancestral heirloom, but a commercial object, a legendary and now infamous commodity on the international gem market. It began a brief but dizzying journey through the hands of several dealers. First, it was acquired by a London broker, then sold to an American diamond merchant named Simon Frankel, who took it to New York. But it seemed that no one wanted to hold on to it for very long. Its reputation, so carefully cultivated by the press and by May Yohei, now preceded it. It was like a hot potato passed quickly from one dealer to another, its beauty undeniable, but its baggage, its story now a significant liability. During this murky period of its history, another dark and exotic chapter was added to its legend, though its authenticity is highly questionable. The story goes that the diamond was sold to a Greek broker, who in turn sold it to the Sultan Abdulhamid II of the Ottoman Empire. This sultan, known as the Red Sultan for his brutal rule, was said to have added the Hope Diamond to his vast collection. And as the story dictates, soon after acquiring the stone, his long and autocratic reign began to crumble. A revolution by the Young Turks forced him from his throne, and he ended his life under house arrest. As for the Greek broker who allegedly facilitated the sale, the legend claims he met a tragic end driving his car off a cliff with his entire family inside. This tale, with its exotic setting and dramatic conclusion, added another layer of international intrigue to the curse, though there is no firm historical evidence to prove the diamond ever made its way to the Sultan's court. It was most likely another fantastic story spun to make the diamond even more mysterious, more dangerous, and therefore more valuable. After several years of being passed around the globe, its legend growing with each transaction, the diamond finally found its way into the hands of a man who knew exactly what to do with it. In 1910, it was purchased by the legendary Parisian jeweler Pierre Cartier of the famed Cartier dynasty. Pierre was more than just a jeweler. He was a master salesman and a brilliant storyteller. When he looked at the Hope Diamond, He didn't just see a 45.5 carat blue gem. He saw its entire tangled tragic history. He saw the Sun King. He saw Marie Antoinette. He saw the feuding hopes and the spurned actress. He saw the alleged curse not as a liability, but as its single greatest selling point. He saw a story he could polish, package, and sell, and he knew he had the perfect customer in mind. An immensely wealthy, famously audacious American heiress who was known for her love of spectacular jewels and her complete disregard for convention. A woman who he wagered would not be afraid of a curse, but would see it as a thrilling challenge. A woman who would want to own not just the diamond, but its entire dark and glittering legend. Her name was Evelyn Walsh McLean, and with her, the Hope Diamond was about to begin its most dramatic, most public, and most truly tragic chapter. Yet not in the old world of Europe, but in the bold, brash new world of America. The woman Pierre Cartier had in his sights was unlike any of the diamond's previous storied owners. She was not a product of the ancient, rigid, and often weary aristocracies of Europe with their centuries of tradition and unspoken rules. Her name was Evelyn Walsh McLean, and she was a uniquely, magnificently American phenomenon. Evelyn was the daughter of an Irish immigrant, a tough, hardworking miner named Thomas Walsh, who had gone out west with nothing but his own two hands and an unshakable dream. And against all odds, he struck it rich. Not just rich, but fabulously, incomprehensibly wealthy, with the discovery of a massive productive gold mine in Colorado. Evelyn was not born into old money. She had exploded into it, a child of the wild, untamed, and optimistic spirit of the American West. As a result, she grew up in an environment of almost unimaginable opulence, but one that was completely untethered from the traditional rules or restraints that governed the European elite. Her childhood was one of wild, unfettered freedom, fostering in her a fiercely rebellious spirit, a powerful independence, and an unshakable, almost childlike belief that there was no problem on earth, no sadness too deep that couldn't be solved, or at least smoothed over with a large enough check. She was impulsive, she was flamboyant, she was often reckless, and she was utterly, profoundly fearless. As a young woman, she married into another great American fortune, merging new money with old. Her husband was Edward Ned McLean, the handsome, charming, and somewhat weak-willed heir to the family that owned the immensely influential newspaper, the Washington Post, as well as the Cincinnati Enquirer. Together, Evelyn and Ned were the ultimate power couple of Washington, D.C. society. They were impossibly rich, endlessly glamorous, and famously unapologetically indulgent. Their home was the glittering, chaotic, and often scandalous center of the American capital's social scene during the Gilded Age and the subsequent Roaring Twenties. And Evelyn, more than anything, had a particular and very public weakness: spectacular, legendary jewelry. She wasn't just a collector in the quiet, scholarly way of Henry Philip Hope. She was a conqueror of gems, and she wore her conquests like a general wears her medals. Pierre Cartier, the master jeweler, an even greater master of human psychology, knew his client perfectly. He understood that selling to the formidable Evelyn Walsh McLean required more than just presenting a beautiful object on a velvet tray. She was a notoriously difficult and famously fickle customer, known for her whims and her tendency to change her mind. She needed more than a stone. She needed a story, a challenge, a piece of grand theater. So he didn't just prepare the diamond for its viewing. He meticulously prepared its legend. He had his researchers compile a detailed history Of all the dark, rumored tragedies associated with the stone, the beheading of Marie Antoinette, the bitter feuding of the Hope family, the dramatic and apocryphal tale of the Turkish Sultan. He then took these stories, embellished them with his own dramatic, thrilling details, and had the entire saga handsomely bound in a custom-made dark leather book. He was not just selling a diamond. He was selling a bespoke legend, a personalized curse crafted specifically for her. When he finally presented the stone to Evelyn and Ned in his opulent Paris salon, he didn't try to downplay or dismiss the curse. He leaned into it. He made it the centerpiece of his sales pitch. In a stroke of pure, unadulterated sales genius, he told the highly superstitious but intensely thrill-seeking heiress that for her the curse would work in reverse. He spun a tale that an object that brought such consistent misfortune and bad luck to others would in her uniquely powerful and charmed hands become a talisman of immense good fortune. It was a brilliant psychological maneuver, a direct and irresistible appeal to her vanity, her sense of exceptionalism, and her deep-seated love of defying expectations. Evelyn, who loved nothing more than a good challenge and truly believed herself to be a woman of singular, untouchable destiny, was completely and utterly hooked by the narrative. The danger didn't frighten her. It thrilled her. The sale, however, was not immediate. The diamond was at that time set in a rather fussy, old-fashioned platinum setting, surrounded by a garland of other large white diamonds, a design which Evelyn immediately disliked. She found it gaudy and old-fashioned. With a characteristic dismissive wave of her hand, she rejected it. But Cartier, a patient and cunning salesman, was not in the least deterred. He knew the stone's strange hypnotic power needed time to work its subtle magic. A few days later, he arranged for the diamond to be delivered to the McLean's lavish hotel suite in Paris, with a simple, tantalizing note. He told her to just keep it for the weekend, to wear it, to live with it, to feel its ancient energy. Evelyn, a woman who could never resist such a dramatic and theatrical proposition, did exactly that. She fastened the heavy cold necklace around her neck. She wore it as she lounged around their opulent suite. She paraded back and forth in front of mirrors, watching the deep blue stone flash and smolder against her skin. She told her friends, with a mischievous glee, that she even tucked it under her pillow as she slept, letting its ancient, mysterious presence fill her dreams. And somewhere in those 2 fateful days, a profound shift occurred. The stone, with its deep, soulful blue and its secret fiery heart, began to cast its undeniable spell. It was no longer just a piece of jewelry in a shop. It felt like a part of her, an extension of her own audacious personality. When Cartier's representative returned on Monday morning to politely retrieve it, Evelyn found to her own surprise that she simply could not let it go. It had become hers. She had been completely and totally conquered. She purchased her magnificent, beautiful trouble, as she would later affectionately call it, for the staggering sum of $180,000, the equivalent of well over $5 million today. The Hope Diamond had crossed the Atlantic. It had found its new fearless and perhaps most faithful owner. Evelyn Walsh McLean's relationship with the Hope Diamond was, to put it mildly, unlike that of any owner who had come before her. This was not a sacred relic to be kept under a glass dome in a quiet scholarly room, as it was for the gentleman collector Henry Philip Hope. Nor was it a potent symbol of state power to be worn only on the most solemn of occasions, as it was for the great kings of France. For Evelyn, the diamond was something far more intimate, far more alive. It was a companion, It was a plaything. It was a constant glittering co-conspirator in the grand, chaotic, and often theatrical production of her own life. And she treated it with a casual, almost reckless intimacy that both shocked and endlessly fascinated the public and the more conservative members of high society. She utterly refused to let it languish in the cold, dark confines of a bank vault or a hidden safe. What she would argue was the point of owning the world's most famous, most storied, most infamous diamond if you couldn't enjoy it, if it couldn't be a part of your daily existence. So she wore it. She wore it nearly every single day with an almost religious devotion. The heavy, magnificent stone, now reset by the master artisans at Cartier into a stunning modern necklace surrounded by a cascading fringe of large, brilliant white diamonds, became as much a part of her daily attire as her shoes or her hat. It became an extension of her very being. Of course, she wore it to the lavish balls and formal state dinners that defined her social calendar. But her true defiance, her true character, was shown in how she wore it during the most mundane of occasions. Imagine the sight: Evelyn dressed in practical clothes, working in her magnificent rose garden, the legendary blue diamond flashing brilliantly in the afternoon sunlight as she snipped away at thorns, its cool weight a familiar presence against her skin. She wore it when she played tennis on her private courts, and she even famously wore it while she went for a swim in her pool, unconcerned by the water or the chlorine. Her attachment to it was so profound, and her treatment of it so unbelievably casual, that her habits became the stuff of Washington legend. In what was perhaps her most famous and repeated antic, she would frequently fasten the priceless, historic necklace around the thick, furry neck of her beloved Great Dane, a large and gentle dog named Mike. She would then let him wander amiably among the astonished and horrified guests at her endless parties. She absolutely delighted in the collective gasps, the nervous laughter, and the palpable anxiety it provoked among her friends and dignitaries. For Evelyn, the diamond was not just an object of immense beauty, but a source of endless amusement, a perfect theatrical prop in the ongoing performance of being Evelyn Walsh McLean. She would invent elaborate games centered around it. She hosted legendary Find the Hope Diamond parties at Friendship, her sprawling, magnificent Washington estate. She would surreptitiously hide the necklace somewhere in the vast labyrinthine mansion, tucked deep under a plush sofa cushion perhaps, or hanging precariously from a crystal chandelier in the ballroom, and then send her powerful and influential guests a list that often included senators, foreign ambassadors, and captains of industry on a tipsy, joyous, and competitive search, crawling around on their hands and knees to find the world's most famous gem. To Evelyn, in these early heady years, the legendary curse was not a threat to be feared, but a wonderful joke to be shared, a thrilling piece of personal mythology that made her own story. And by extension, her legendary parties all the more exciting, glamorous, and memorable. Their home friendship became the undisputed, glittering epicenter of Washington, D.C. social and political life. It was not just a home. It was a perpetual party, a stage for the nation's elite. The McLeans entertained on a scale that was almost unimaginable even for the wealthy. Their parties were legendary affairs, often lasting for days at a time, with an endless flowing river of champagne and a guest list that included literally everyone who was anyone. Presidents like Warren G. Harding cabinet members, Supreme Court justices visiting Hollywood movie stars, and international royalty all flocked to Friendship to be seen. And at the glittering, chaotic, and often deafening center of it all, there was always Evelyn holding court, her voice loud, her laugh infectious, a whirlwind of energy and charisma. And on her neck, or sometimes famously on her dog's, was the ever-present hypnotic blue diamond, flashing and sparkling, a perfect symbol for the boundless, sometimes reckless, and seemingly eternal optimism of America's Gilded Age and the roaring twenties that followed. It was a time of seemingly endless prosperity and limitless possibility, and the Hope Diamond was its shimmering blue and beautiful mascot. But behind the glittering, almost blinding facade of this nonstop celebration, behind the endless popping of champagne corks and the cacophony of manufactured joy, quiet hairline cracks were beginning to appear in the very foundation of their perfect golden world. The ceaseless, frantic partying was not always a sign of pure, unadulterated joy. Sometimes, often, it was a desperate, noisy attempt to mask a growing, unspoken despair. The marriage between the vivacious Evelyn and the charming Ned was in private, deeply, profoundly troubled and fraught with ceaseless conflict. Ned, who lacked his wife's iron constitution and rebellious spirit, began to buckle under the immense weight of their lifestyle and his own personal demons. He drank heavily, constantly. He was openly, repeatedly, and humiliatingly unfaithful. His behavior, once so charming, grew more erratic, more public, and more unreliable. And Evelyn, heartbroken and publicly humiliated by his many betrayals, but fiercely determined to maintain a brave, unflappable public face, also sought solace in the bottomless champagne glass. She began to drink to numb the pain, to keep the party going at all costs, to avoid the quiet, lonely, terrifying moments when the music finally stopped and she was left alone with her thoughts. Their immense, seemingly infinite wealth, it turned out, did not bring them happiness. It did not solve their problems. It simply gave them more expensive, more dramatic, and more public ways to display their profound and growing unhappiness. The Gilded Age was for many of its brightest stars a gilded cage, and the MacLanes were trapped in the most beautiful and opulent one of all, with a legendary blue diamond resting like a heavy cold stone on the door. The whispers of the curse had been silent for a while, drowned out by the loud, insistent beat of the jazz music, but they were about to return, and this time they would be impossible to ignore. And then it happened. The glittering, chaotic, champagne-soaked party that had been Evelyn Walsh MacLane's life for 2 decades came to a sudden, brutal, and screeching halt. The invisible shield of wealth and optimism that she had wrapped around herself was finally irrevocably pierced. The tragedy that brought her world crashing down was not a stock market collapse or a humiliating public scandal, things she might have been able to navigate with her characteristic bravado. It was something far more primal, far more absolute. It was the kind of raw, foundational, soul-shattering grief from which a person, no matter how strong or resilient, can never truly fully recover. In the late spring of May of 1919, their firstborn son, Vincent Walsh MacLane, was playing outside the formidable gates of their magnificent Friendship estate. He was just 9 years old, a bright, beloved boy, the adored heir to 2 of America's great fortunes. He was a child who had known nothing in his short life but overwhelming love, endless privilege, and the secure belief that the world was a safe and wonderful place. In a horrific, inexplicable, and sickeningly random moment of time, he darted out from the sidewalk into the street, directly into the path of an oncoming Ford automobile. He was struck, and he was killed almost instantly. For Evelyn, this was more than a tragedy. It was the apocalypse. It was a shattering, deafening blow, from which the light in her world, the very source of her famous boundless energy, would never fully return. The woman who had genuinely believed herself immune to misfortune, who had so famously and publicly laughed in the face of dark legends and ancient curses, was now confronted with the most profound and irreversible of all human sorrows, the death of a child. Her perfect golden world, the world she had so carefully, so joyfully, so extravagantly constructed and curated, did not just crack. It disintegrated into fine gray dust around her. The endless parties stopped immediately. The jazz music died. The laughter which had once echoed through the halls of her home was gone. And the great house of friendship, once a symbol of American joy and power, was plunged into a deep, suffocating, and heavy silence, broken only by the inconsolable sounds of a mother's unending grief. In the long, dark, and sleepless nights that followed as she lay awake in her bed, the weight of her sorrow, a physical, crushing presence in the room. Evelyn's tormented thoughts inevitably, obsessively turned to the heavy blue stone that lay in its custom-made Cartier case on her bedside table. The joke was over. The game was finished. Her life as a fearless, untouchable icon was over. And a new, terrible, and insidious thought began to take root in the fertile soil of her grief. It was a thought that would grow in the darkness, twisting and turning, until it became a dark and unshakable conviction. She began to wonder, truly deeply and terrifyingly wonder, what if all the stories were true? What if the curse was not just a clever theatrical sales pitch from the master salesman Pierre Cartier? What if it was not just a bit of exciting romantic mythology to make the diamond more interesting? What if it was a real, tangible, malevolent force, an ancient evil that she had foolishly invited into her home? She replayed every moment in her mind. What if her own hubris, her own defiant public laughter in the face of the legend, had been a terrible, arrogant, and ultimately fatal mistake? What if by treating the curse as a game, by dressing her dog in the diamond, by hiding it under sofa cushions, she had shown a profound disrespect to a powerful, dark entity? Had she, through her own arrogance, brought this unspeakable tragedy into her home? Had she somehow brought this horror down upon the head of her innocent, beloved son? The diamond was no longer her plaything, her beautiful, sparkling trouble. It was now a suspect in the murder of her child. It was a silent, cold, unblinking blue eye, a malevolent witness to her unending pain. It became, in the dark corners of her grieving mind, the very source of her agony. The curse, which had once been a source of thrilling amusement and a great cocktail party story, was now a terrifying, ever-present ghost that haunted her every waking moment and filled her tortured dreams with dread and self-recrimination. The death of their son was the single catastrophic blow that broke the already fragile, cracking spine of their tumultuous marriage. Ned McLean, who had always been emotionally unstable, completely and utterly unraveled. There was no coming back from this. He spiraled deeper and deeper into the dark, lonely abyss of alcoholism, his public behavior becoming more and more erratic, shameful and publicly embarrassing for the family. He began to suffer from profound paranoid delusions, his connection to reality fraying day by day until it finally irrevocably snapped. He left Evelyn and their remaining children embarking on a final desperate cross-country binge of wild spending and public debauchery that only hastened his complete mental and physical collapse. Eventually, his family had no choice. Ned McLean was declared legally insane by a court of law. The charming, handsome heir to the Washington Post was quietly committed to a mental institution where he would live out the remainder of his sad, lonely days, a broken man lost forever in the thick, impenetrable fog of his own ruined mind. Evelyn was now truly alone left to navigate the smoldering wreckage of her once enviable life. Her husband was gone a living ghost. Her beloved son was gone forever. And the great family fortune that she had once believed was an impenetrable shield against all of life's sorrows was now beginning to seem like a powerful, cruel magnet for it. The hope diamond, which she had once paraded with such unadulterated joy and fearless defiance, was now a heavy, cold weight around her neck, a constant physical reminder of all that she had lost. She still wore it perhaps now, out of a defiant, stubborn habit, perhaps because she was now too terrified to ever take it off, fearing what further unimaginable tragedy its absence might unleash upon her remaining family. The stone that had once been the shining symbol of her fearless American optimism was now the inescapable symbol of her deepest, most profound, and most enduring pain. The gilded cage was now just a cage, its bars cold, hard, and unyielding, and the party was well and truly and forever over. The cascade of tragedies for Evelyn Walsh McLean did not end with the death of her son and the institutionalization of her husband. The curse, whether real or imagined, was seemingly not yet finished with her. The next blow was not as sudden or as violent as the loss of a child, but it was a slow grinding and humiliating erosion of the very foundation upon which her identity had been built, her family's immense wealth. With Ned institutionalized and unable to manage his affairs, the great media empire he had inherited began to crumble. The Washington Post, the crown jewel of the McLean family fortune, the very newspaper that had given them so much power and prestige in the nation's capital, was crippled by mismanagement and the financial fallout of the Great Depression. The paper slid into bankruptcy. In 1933, it was sold at a public auction for a fraction of its former worth. The McLean name was no longer attached to it. Evelyn, the woman who had once been one of the wealthiest and most powerful women in America, a woman for whom money had been no object, was now forced to face the harsh and unfamiliar reality of financial hardship. She was forced to sell off many of her prized possessions, her properties, her art, her other famous jewels. The sprawling Friendship estate, once the scene of so much joy and celebration, had to be leased out. Her life, once a spectacle of limitless abundance, became a quiet, constant struggle to pay bills and maintain a semblance of her former dignity. But through all of it, there was one thing she refused to part with, one asset she could not sell: the Hope Diamond. It remained with her, a constant heavy presence. By this point, her relationship with the stone was profoundly complex. It was the symbol of all her sorrow, the suspected source of all her pain, but it was also, in a strange way, all she had left of her former magnificent life. Perhaps she held on to it because she truly believed that selling it, letting it go, would unleash an even greater, more terrible tragedy upon her surviving children. Perhaps in the depths of her grief, she had made a silent, superstitious pact with the stone. I will keep you, I will shelter you, if you will just spare the rest of my family. So she clung to it, her beautiful, terrible blue burden. For many years, it seemed as though her silent prayer might have been answered. Life was quieter, harder, but the relentless tide of tragedy seemed to have receded. Her surviving daughter, also named Evelyn, but known to the family as Evie, grew up, got married, and had children of her own. For a time, it seemed that Evelyn might finally be allowed to find a measure of peace in her later years, the peace of being a grandmother. But the curse, or the simple, cruel randomness of life, had one final devastating blow in store. In 1946, tragedy struck the family again, with a chilling and heartbreaking echo of the past. Her daughter Evie, just 25 years old, was found dead in her bed. The official cause of death was an accidental overdose of sleeping pills. Some whispered it was a suicide, that the young woman had been overwhelmed by the dark legacy of her family's name. Others insisted it was a tragic, foolish accident, but for her mother, the cause hardly mattered. The result was the same. Her daughter was gone. The second of her 4 children had been taken from her. This was the final unendurable cut. Now picture Evelyn Walsh McLean in her last years. The vibrant, fearless life of the party heiress is gone forever. In her place is an old woman living a quiet, solitary life, haunted by a litany of ghosts. Her husband, her son, her daughter, her family's great fortune all gone, all turned to dust. She was a queen, reigning over an empire of memories, a landscape of loss, and the one constant companion that had been with her through the dizzying heights of her joy and the crushing depths of her sorrow was the great blue diamond. It still hung around her neck, but its light had changed. It no longer sparkled with the promise of hope and endless possibility. Now, in the twilight of her life, its deep blue facets seemed only to reflect the profound, bottomless ocean of her own grief. It was her confessor, her accuser, and the last tangible link to a life that now felt like someone else's distant, impossible dream. In the spring of 1947, at the age of 60, Evelyn Walsh McLean passed away. After a life of such dramatic, dizzying highs and such crushing, devastating lows, her end was remarkably peaceful. She died quietly in her sleep. The whirlwind that had been her life finally came to a gentle rest. The fearless heiress, the queen of Washington society, the grieving mother, the lonely survivor, all of her many selves were now at peace. Her long, tumultuous, and deeply tragic chapter in the history of the Hope Diamond was finally mercifully over. When her final will and testament was read, it revealed the profound and complex evolution of her relationship with the famous blue stone. The will contained a very specific and very poignant stipulation regarding the diamond. The woman who had once laughed at the curse now showed in her final wishes just how deeply she had come to fear it. She requested that her entire collection of jewelry, including the Hope diamond, be placed in a trust. It was to be held untouched until her grandchildren, the children of her deceased daughter Evie, had reached the age of 25. It was a mother's and a grandmother's last desperate attempt to shield her remaining family from the sorrow that had so relentlessly plagued her own life. She seemed to believe that time itself might be the only antidote to the stone's malevolent power. Perhaps she hoped that by letting a generation pass by, letting the stone lie dormant for 2.5 decades, the curse, the dark energy that she believed clung to it might finally fade away. It was a final, superstitious, and deeply loving act of protection from beyond the grave. She was trying to outwit fate, to buy time for her loved ones, a quiet act of hope from a woman who had lost so much. But the world she left behind was one of practicalities, of debts and legal obligations. The surviving members of her family and the trustees of her estate had a different perspective. They had lived through the final tragic decades. They had witnessed firsthand the immense suffering that had surrounded the diamond. They had seen the wreckage of Evelyn's life, and they wanted no part of the legend. To them, the diamond was not a beautiful mystery or a thrilling challenge. It was a symbol of immense pain, a heavy, sorrowful inheritance they did not wish to carry. Furthermore, Evelyn's estate, once so vast, was now saddled with significant debt. The trustees petitioned the court, arguing that they needed to sell the jewelry collection in order to settle these debts and provide for the grandchildren in a more practical, less cursed way. The court agreed. Evelyn's final protective wish was overruled by the cold, hard logic of finance. The trust was broken. The jewelry was to be sold. The Hope diamond was once again on the market. And so in 1949, 2 years after Evelyn's death, the entire collection was purchased by a single buyer. He was a man who was no stranger to legendary gems, a man whose name was in the world of diamonds as famous as Cartier. His name was Harry Winston. He was known as the King of Diamonds, a New York City jeweler who had owned, cut, and sold some of the most spectacular stones in history. He was a brilliant businessman, a master craftsman, and a man with a keen sense of history and public relations. When Harry Winston acquired the Hope diamond, he was acquiring more than just another magnificent stone for his inventory. He was acquiring its entire heavy and now world-famous history of tragedy and intrigue. But unlike all the owners who had come before him, Winston had a vision for the diamond that was entirely new. He had no intention of wearing it himself. He had no intention of letting his wife wear it. And his ultimate goal was not to sell it for a quick and massive profit. He had a different, more profound, and more public-spirited idea in mind. He would become the diamond's final private owner, its last custodian. He would be the one to finally and definitively change its destiny. The long, turbulent, and often heartbreaking journey of the Hope diamond was at last drawing to a close. After centuries of being passed from kings to queens, from bankers to bankrupts, from fearless heiresses to grieving mothers, it had found its way into the hands of a man who would not try to possess it, but would choose to liberate it. From the quiet, masterful hands of Harry Winston, the stone was about to begin the last, and by far the most peaceful chapter of its long and storied existence. So let us take one last gentle breath together, a breath of quiet relief, and follow this beautiful, weary blue stone to its final and permanent resting place. The man who now held the fate of the Hope diamond in his hands was in his own way a king. His name was Harry Winston, and his kingdom was the world of precious gems. Known universally as the King of Diamonds, he was the most famous and respected jeweler of the 20th century. Over his long and illustrious career, he had bought, sold, and cut some of the most spectacular and historic stones the world had ever known, from the Yonker to the Vargas. He was a man who understood diamonds not just as beautiful objects, but as living pieces of history, each with its own unique personality and story. But even for a man like Winston, who had handled countless treasures, the Hope diamond was different. It was special. He approached it with a unique sense of reverence and respect. He understood the immense power of its story, the deep, dark, and tragic mythology that clung to it like a shroud. And he seemed to understand that his role was not just to be another owner, another name on the long list of its possessors, but to be something different. He was to be its healer. For the first time in its long and tumultuous history, the diamond was in the hands of a man whose goal was not to hoard its beauty for himself, but to share it. Harry Winston did not lock the Hope diamond away in a secure vault to be viewed only by a select few. Instead, he did something unprecedented. He decided to send it on tour. He created a magnificent traveling exhibition called the Court of Jewels, a dazzling collection of his most important gems with the Hope diamond as the undisputed star of the show. This exhibition traveled all across the United States, stopping in cities large and small, allowing ordinary people a chance to see these legendary treasures up close. Imagine the scene repeated in city after city: a local museum, or a fine jewelry store, and outside a long, quiet, patient line of people stretching down the block. School children, farmers, office workers, housewives, people from all walks of life, drawn by the irresistible allure of the famous cursed diamond. They would file in their voices, hushed with anticipation, and stand before the display case, mesmerized by the stone's deep blue fire. For the first time, the Hope Diamond was not a symbol of aristocratic privilege or unimaginable private wealth. It had become a public treasure, a piece of shared history that belonged to everyone. And this tour had another, even more noble purpose. It was a charitable endeavor. Winston used the fame of the Hope Diamond to raise money for numerous causes, including medical charities and educational programs. The diamond, which for so long had been associated with death, tragedy, and loss, was now, for the first time, actively being used to help people, to support communities, to bring a measure of good into the world. Its dark karma, it seemed, was finally being cleansed. It was no longer taking, it was giving. The curse was being rewritten one charitable donation at a time. The whispers of misfortune were being replaced by the quiet gratitude of those who benefited from its newfound benevolence. After nearly a decade of these successful tours, after sharing the diamond's beauty with millions of Americans, Harry Winston made another even more historic and audacious decision. It was a decision that would secure his own legacy and finally permanently change the destiny of the stone. He decided to give it away. He would donate the Hope Diamond free and clear, with no strings attached to the people of the United States, to be housed in their national museum, the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. He believed that a stone of such immense historical and scientific importance should not and could not belong to any single individual. It belonged to the world. It needed to be preserved, to be studied by scientists, and to be displayed for all future generations to see and to learn from. It was an act of extraordinary generosity and profound historical foresight. He wasn't just giving away a jewel. He was giving away its entire heavy history. He was making a conscious, deliberate choice to break the cycle. He wanted to end the legend of the curse once and for all by taking away the one thing that seemed to fuel it: private ownership. The stone would no longer have a master. Its new custodian would be the nation itself. Harry Winston's grand gesture of donating the Hope Diamond to the nation was an extraordinary act in itself. But the way in which he chose to make this historic delivery is perhaps the most charming, the most quietly audacious, and the most memorable part of the entire story. This is the detail that truly signals the end of the diamond's dark and dramatic past. How does one transport one of the most famous, most valuable, and supposedly most cursed objects on the planet one? Might imagine an armored truck, a team of heavily armed guards, a secret high-speed convoy, under the cover of darkness. That is what one would expect for an object of such immense value and notoriety. But Harry Winston, a man who always had a flair for the theatrical, chose to do the exact opposite. He took the priceless Hope Diamond, a stone valued at the time at over $1 million, and he placed it in a simple, unassuming cardboard box. He then wrapped the box in plain brown paper, tied it with string, and addressed it to the Smithsonian Institution. And then he sent it to its final home through the regular, everyday United States Postal Service. The total cost of this historic delivery was a mere $2.44 in postage, plus an additional $155 for insurance, a fraction of the stone's actual worth. It was a gesture of supreme confidence, a quiet democratic act that treated this legendary gem like any other package being sent from one citizen to another. I want you to take a moment to picture this. Imagine the local postman, a man named James G. Todd, going about his daily route on that November day. He picks up the mail, his bag heavy with letters and packages. And somewhere in that bag, nestled amongst bills and birthday cards and magazines, is a simple plain brown paper package. He has no idea, of course, that he is carrying a priceless piece of history, a stone that has been owned by kings, stolen by revolutionaries, and blamed for a litany of human tragedies. He is just a man doing his job, a humble and unwitting participant in the final peaceful chapter of this epic tale. That simple, unremarkable brown box, traveling quietly and anonymously through the ordinary mail system, became the perfect, understated symbol for the end of the diamond's long and tortured journey. The drama was over. The mystique was being deliberately, beautifully undone. And so, on November 10th, 1958, the package arrived safely at its destination. The Hope Diamond was officially welcomed into the permanent collection of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. There, it was given a place of honor. A special state-of-the-art climate-controlled vault and display case was designed specifically for it, a secure and beautiful final home. It quickly became and remains to this day the single most popular and visited object in the entire vast collection of the National Museum of Natural History, the glittering blue star of the National Gem and Mineral Collection. And there, under the watchful eyes of security guards, and admired by millions of visitors each year, it rests. So the final question remains: was the curse finally broken? Well, if we look at the evidence, the answer seems to be a quiet, resounding yes. Since the day it entered the public trust of the Smithsonian, no further tragedies have been credibly associated with the stone. The postman James G. Todd, despite the sensationalist claims of some tabloids, lived a long and perfectly normal life, suffering no more than the usual aches and pains of a life well lived. The curators, the guards, the scientists who have studied and cared for the diamond over the past 6 decades have all remained safe and sound. It seems that Harry Winston's intuition was correct. The curse, whether it was a real supernatural force or simply the reflection of human greed and sorrow, thrived on the very idea of private ownership, on the intense personal and often obsessive relationships that people formed with the stone. Once it belonged to no one, and therefore to everyone, its power to cause misery seemed to evaporate. It was as if the stone, finally able to rest, to simply be an object of shared wonder and scientific study, could at last let go of the centuries of human tragedy it had silently witnessed. It was finally and truly at peace. And so, our long and winding journey for tonight comes to its gentle quiet and final end. We have followed the silent glittering path of a single blue stone as it has moved like a lonely, beautiful moon through the grand and often turbulent sky of human history. We have allowed our minds to drift back in time to stand as silent observers in the warm, candlelit halls of Versailles, and to feel the immense, almost crushing weight of the Sun King's absolute power. We have felt the bone-deep chill of fear and the intoxicating, terrifying chaos in the blood-soaked streets of revolutionary Paris. We have sat unseen in the quiet, wood-paneled scholarly drawing rooms of aristocratic Victorian London, smelling the old paper and the polished wood. and we have danced vicariously at the glittering, frantic champagne-soaked parties of Jazz Age America, a world of boundless optimism and profound hidden sorrow. Through all of it, through every rise and every fall, through every celebration and every execution, the Hope Diamond was there. It was a silent, impassive, and perfect witness to it all. It has seen the dizzying heights of human power and the crushing, lonely depths of human despair. It has reflected the soft light of genuine, devoted love and the cold, hard darkness of bitter, corrosive greed. It has been present for acts of genius, for moments of profound madness, for unimaginable, soul-shattering sorrow, and for quiet, unshakable, and enduring dignity. In its silent, flawless, crystalline heart, it has seen all the facets of the human condition. So as we rest here now, in the quiet of the night, we are left with the final gentle question that has lingered like a soft shadow beneath our entire story. Is the curse real? Is there truly a dark, malevolent energy, an ancient and sorrowful force that lives deep within that beautiful blue stone, a tangible power that brings ruin and despair to those who dare to possess it? Or is the curse simply a story, a magnificent, compelling, and deeply human narrative that we as people have so skillfully woven around a series of tragic, but perhaps entirely random and unconnected events? Is it just a way for us to try and find meaning in the meaningless, to find a comforting pattern in the terrifying chaos of life and death? Is it a way to explain the unexplainable, to rationalize the profoundly unsettling fact that sometimes terrible, heartbreaking things just happen even to kings and queens, even to the rich and powerful, even to the innocent? Perhaps in the end, as we let go and allow ourselves to drift off to sleep, the definitive answer to that question doesn't truly matter. Perhaps the real truth, the real magic of the Hope Diamond, is not found in any supernatural curse, but in the powerful, silent, and deeply personal story it tells us about ourselves. It reminds us, in its quiet, glittering way, that all the beautiful, seemingly eternal things of this world, the great gems, the grand palaces, the timeless works of art, are in the end just silent, beautiful, and empty vessels. And it is we, in our brief, fleeting, fragile, and beautiful lives, who fill them with meaning. We are the ones who pour our own stories into them. We fill them with our love, our ambition, our hopes, our fears, our joy, and our profound sorrow. We come and we go, like motes of dust, dancing in a sunbeam, like breaths turning to mist on a cold winter's day. We live our lives, and we leave behind our stories, our emotions, our whispers imprinted on the silent, patient objects we leave behind. The diamond then doesn't hold a curse. It holds our history. It holds pieces of our collective human heart. And now it is time to let this story go. It is time to release it. Let it and all its characters, the kings, the queens, the collectors, the heiresses, dissolve gently and peacefully into the soft, welcoming fabric of your dreams. Let the images we've conjured tonight, the soft, flickering candlelight, the rich, dark velvet, the deep, hypnotic, and ultimately peaceful blue of the stone guide, you now leading you down a quiet, gentle path into a truly deep and restorative sleep. Let the long journey end here, in this quiet, safe, and comfortable space that you have created for yourself. There are no more curses to fear, no more tragedies to witness, no more stories to follow. There is only the calm, silent, and benevolent peace of the night. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the hazy halls of history tonight. It has been a true and sincere pleasure to share this story with you. May your rest be deep and untroubled. May your mind be calm and quiet. And may your dreams be wonderfully, beautifully sweet. Good night.